Well, as a small boy, a little something started in me that I wanted to go fishing. And I think then, at that point, I started dreaming about the places I wanted to go fishing. And then I started to read books about fishing. And one particular bit that sticks in my mind is a wonderful author called B.B., who wrote in the front of his book about how short life was and how lucky trees were, because they have such long lives. Now, can you imagine how long the life of this oak tree's been? He's had the privilege of standing here in what, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful parts of Great Britain. The River Wye winds its way down out of Wales, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and arrives here. And I'm the lucky man who gets to fish here. And I think as time went on, the dreams got bigger, the fish in my mind got bigger, and eventually the reality came about. Not instantly. I've been to a lot of places, I've fished a lot of places, but people say, what's left on your bucket list? And what's left on my bucket list is right here. It can't be better. You simply can't find anything more exciting than the River Wye. It's just the most beautiful, clear river where you can see huge fish swimming about, and it's just completely mesmerising. Others say, oh, it's just the being there. Well, if it's just the being there, I'd quite happily just sit underneath this oak tree and maybe share a bottle of wine with myself later. But in the meantime, I'm going to go and try and catch some of those barbel. So I've come down and said good morning to that absolutely magnificent oak tree who looks after this river for me. A magnificent river which comes all the way down here from Wales. It gets bigger and bigger, as I say. All my sort of dreams started off so much smaller than this. This is, to me now, perfect. My first love when I first started to read about fishing was the chalk streams, the Hampshire Avon, the royalty fishery. But over the years, my horizons have spread. You have to have a bit of luck in everything. And I actually first came up here with a fishing friend to fish a lake, a carp lake in Landrindod Wells. I got a bit bored with that, so I went for a walk and found a little river. I followed it, and it joined the River Wye. And I think that it was love at first sight. And it's a love that just never, ever wanes. And hopefully, I'm going to get you a couple of the barbel, which oddly enough aren't an indigenous species to this river. What must be, in some ways, for me anyway, the most beautiful barbel river in the country, certainly with the most beautiful barbel, not necessarily the biggest, but it was never officially stocked. The fish were all taken out of the Severn years ago, tipped off bridges, I believe, and now we end up with this massive stock of barbel over 100 odd miles of river. But it's not rocket science. If you can get away from the crowd and do something quite simple, I've just got a fairly considerable amount of pellet, or most people would consider so. That will be gone. I will use that lot with no problem whatsoever. Once you start fishing, I find on this river, if you're not getting actual bites, not actually catching fish, and you're not getting line bites, which you get quite a lot of, you're simply not feeding enough. If you found some fish and you've sat on them, just keep feeding, and that's the way to get their attention. That's the way, instead of just casting in and maybe catching one and the others will bolt, what I'm trying to create is this sort of feeding spot where I've got several barbel, hopefully maybe even dozens at times, all feeding, all getting competitive with each other. And then when I suddenly whip Charlie out from around the back, they don't even notice because they're all so competitive on the bait still. So again, I take my time. I try to build that situation before I even cast in. So then when I cast in, there's nothing very special in the end. There's a couple of said pellets. Obviously they're drilled and simply put on a hair on a size 10 hook, absolutely straightforward herring, on a piece of monofilament that runs up to this lovely little contraption, which simply enables me to change my hook link at any moment by sliding that off, but mainly because the lead is on a little trap there. If it gets caught up, if I snag up, it simply comes off and slides off up the line and disappears. I don't tether fish. That's the worst thing you can possibly even consider doing. Now, some people aren't particularly mad on lead core braid. I have about 2 foot there in old money of lead core braid on there because A, I want that to lie nice and flat on the bottom. B, I love that weedy colour. Fish do not like bumping into monofilament. The fact they can actually see that and bump into it scares them far less, oddly enough. But lastly, it's a very rocky river. I do not want to get cut off, and it's that piece of line between the end of my reel line and the lead that takes the most stick as it bumps across the rocks or the fish run round rocks, and that's probably my main reason for using it. I don't get the cut-offs. So that's it. It's as simple as that, really. So we need to get some pellet going into the river, and then we need to drop that right in amongst them, and hopefully they won't even notice it's gone in because they've got so used to those pellets going in, going in, going in. Now, before I go and put all that pellet in, there is one other aspect to this relatively simple rig, and that is on this, below the swivel here, this little sleeve just slides off, and there's a loop under there. You can see that little metal loop, and all I have on the end of my hook link is a loop that slips into it, and then this little gadget just slides back over the top of it, and it can't fall apart, and it's nicely protected, and it doesn't tangle when it's cast. So that all works very, very nicely. And it also enables me to change this hook link regularly, because trust me, fishing these very gravelly, very rocky rivers, your hook link can get damaged so easily. So really every cast you need to just run your fingers down your hook link and check your hook point. Otherwise you'll wonder why you get snapped up so easily. It's probably because you've got a dink on this already, or you wonder why you're getting bites that aren't getting hooked up. It's because the point of your hook has just bumped a rock on its way in and just knocks the point over so easily. Now, enough of that. Let's put some bait in and try and catch some fish. But this is really the second most important part. The most important part is, of course, finding some fish, which at the moment, with rivers nice and low and clear like this, is relatively easy. But this is a classic sort of barbel swim on this river, on this top half of the river. It varies a lot when it gets down the bottom. But here you get shallows. You know, this river's come all the way down here from the last deep bend, relatively shallow, get lots of oxygen in it, then it drops. And the barbel particularly like it, the bottom of the river's dropped, and then it will come back up, and the barbel will love to sit there. I think it's because as the river comes across here, flowing at a reasonable rate, it slows down as it goes across the deep water, and the food all drops out of it and ends up in the back end of that little drop off, and the barbel will love to sit on that little, almost like a little cliff at the tail end of it. So I'm going to introduce some pellet, so it's all going to end up in that spot. Hopefully I can avoid the chub by doing it, because usually the chub shoal will sit in front of the barbel shoal. I'm lucky enough to know the swim, so I know pretty well that the chub will be somewhere out in front of me, and just below it the barbel will be. So you choose your spot and you start getting that bait in there. Well, a couple of hours on the river, what could be better? How much better than that can life really get? I'm not sure there's many ways life can get that much better than that. I suppose the bottle of red wine, bit of David Gilmour comforting me in London, very loud. Later on, might run it a second.